For 7 years, the girl hadn't spoken a single word. Every specialist said the same thing: your daughter will never speak again. Her father spent millions, threatened doctors, flew to 4 continents. They all declared it hopeless. Then a Nigerian single mother in a Seoul clinic noticed something no one else did. And what she discovered hiding in that child's throat will leave you speechless. If you're already hooked and want to see how deep this forbidden love goes, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me if you'd risk everything for love and smash that like button, because this story is about to get wild. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Jim Hongul was a ghost. The kind of man whose name made people disappear. Korean mafia boss. Criminal empire stretching through Seoul's underworld. Bulletproof penthouses, armed enforcers, more power than most see in 10 lifetimes. But his daughter Min was silent, 7 years old, hadn't spoken since the night she watched her mother die. Jim tried everything. Seoul National University Hospital, specialists in Tokyo, psychiatrists in Switzerland. Doctors who charged hundreds of thousands per consultation. They ran tests, brain scans, experimental therapy. All of them said the same thing: irreversible trauma. Accept it. But Jim couldn't accept it because Min was all he had left. His wife was murdered in a rival gang attack. So Jim kept searching, kept spending, kept threatening anyone who said no. What he didn't know, the answer wasn't coming from a specialist. It was coming from a stranger he'd never look at twice. A woman working a clinic shift just to make rent. Miriam Nona was a widow, 31, trauma nurse turned immigrant worker. Just a single mother trying to keep food on the table for her own daughter. But she noticed something about Min that every specialist had missed. Something in her throat, something physical beneath the psychological wounds. And in the middle of that crowded clinic with bodyguards watching and a dangerous father steps away, she made a decision that would either save the girl's voice or end her own life. What happened next? The Gangnam penthouse stretched across the 42nd floor like a cage made of steel and glass. From the outside, it looked like power. Floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows. Security cameras tracking every shadow. Guards stationed at every entrance, their presence more permanent than the marble floors beneath their boots. But inside, silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that feels like sanctuary. This silence was suffocating, heavy, like something had been strangled and left to rot in every corner. Men in black suits moved through the corridors without speaking. Their footsteps were measured, deliberate. They'd learned quickly. Mr. Jim didn't tolerate noise. No television played in that penthouse. No music. No laughter echoing off the walls. Just silence. And somewhere in that silence, a father was drowning. Jim Hongul woke at 5:47 a.m., same as every morning. He didn't need an alarm. Sleep was something that came in fragments now, broken pieces scattered across the night. He checked the security feeds first. 12 monitors displaying every angle of his fortress. The lobby. The garage. The hallway outside Min's room. Nothing moved that he didn't control. Nothing breathed that he didn't allow. By 6:15, his lieutenants arrived. 3 men who'd killed for him, bled for him, built his empire from Seoul's underground into something that stretched across borders. They stood in his office and gave their reports in hushed Korean. Numbers. Territories. Problems that needed solving. Jim listened with his jaw tight, his eyes flat. He gave orders in single syllables. When they left, the silence returned like water filling a grave. At 7:30, he walked to Min's room. She was already awake, sitting at her small desk by the window, drawing. Always drawing. Her hand moved across the paper in quick strokes, recreating the same scene she'd been drawing for 7 years. A woman with long black hair. A man's shadow in the doorway. Red everywhere. So much red. Jim stood in the doorway watching his daughter's small shoulders, the way her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the crayon harder. She never looked up when he entered. Never acknowledged his presence. He was a ghost in her world, just another shadow that couldn't speak loud enough to reach her. He pulled a chair beside her and sat. "Minna," he whispered. "Nothing." Her hand kept moving. Red crayon. More red. Always more red. They sat like that for an hour. Father and daughter. Separated by silence thicker than the bulletproof glass protecting them from the world outside. Jim watched her draw the same nightmare over and over, powerless to stop it, powerless to reach her. The envelope arrived at 9 a.m. His assistant brought it in, set it on his desk, and left without a word. Jim recognized the Swiss postmark immediately. The Institute for Kinderpsychiatry. His last hope. The most expensive, most exclusive psychiatric facility in Europe. He'd sent Min's records 3 months ago. Waited. Paid their consultation fee that could have bought a small apartment. He opened the envelope with steady hands. Read the letter once. Then again. The words were polite, professional, final. Severe psychological trauma, irreversible selective mutism, no medical intervention recommended, suggest acceptance and adaptive communication strategies. Acceptance. Jim walked to the window and stared at Seoul stretching below him. A city he controlled. A city that bent his will. He held the letter over the marble ashtray on his desk and lit it with his silver lighter. Watched the paper curl and blacken. Watched the word irreversible turn to ash. Behind him, Min kept drawing. The crayon scraped against paper. Red. Always red. The only sound in his suffocating fortress. Miriam Nona's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., the sound cutting through the thin walls of her Itaewon apartment like a knife. She silenced it before the second beep, her hand already reaching, her body trained to wake before the noise could disturb her daughter sleeping in the next room. The apartment was cramped, 2 rooms that barely qualified as rooms, but it was theirs. Rent paid. Lights on. That was something. She dressed in the dark. Navy blue scrubs, the fabric worn soft from too many washes. Her nursing certificate hung on the wall beside her daughter's drawings, the frame from Lagos still intact despite 3 moves in 2 years. Bachelor of Science in Nursing, University of Lagos. In Korea, it meant she could work reception at hospitals, change bedpans at care facilities, take weekend shifts at community clinics that paid less than minimum wage. But it meant she could work. That was everything. By 5:15, she was on the subway. The early train was mostly empty, just other immigrants heading to jobs that started before sunrise. Cleaning crews. Factory workers. Women like her who'd come to Seoul chasing promises that turned out to be half-truths. The city was modern, gleaming, full of opportunity. Just not for people who looked like her. Not for people whose Korean came with an accent too thick to smooth out. Her first shift started at 6. Samsung Medical Center, where she worked the reception desk in the emergency wing. 12 hours of checking patients in, answering phones in broken Korean, smiling politely when doctors walked past her like she was furniture. She'd treated gunshot wounds in Lagos. Stabilized patients during power outages with nothing but a flashlight and her hands. Here, she filed paperwork and apologized for her pronunciation. The nursing supervisor, Mrs. Park, barely looked at her when she clocked in. "You're covering the weekend clinic shift too, yes? Dr. Kim is short-staffed." Miriam nodded. That made 3 shifts this week. Hospital, then the elderly care facility in Gangnam where she bathed and fed a woman who called her the Dark One, then the weekend clinic. 70 hours if she was lucky. 80 if she wasn't. Her daughter Ada would stay with Mrs. Chin downstairs, the Chinese grandmother who watched immigrant children for cash and didn't ask questions. She thought about Ada during the quiet moments between patients. 8 years old. Smart as lightning. Asking questions Miriam didn't know how to answer. "Mama, When can we go home to Lagos? She'd asked last night, her voice small, uncertain. Home. As if Lagos was still home. As if they could go back to the apartment they'd left, the life they'd abandoned after Ada's father died and the debt collectors came knocking. We're building something better here, Miriam had told her, smoothing her daughter's hair. Something that will last. Ada didn't look convinced. Neither was Miriam most days. But she kept her skilled eyes sharp. That's what her mentor in Lagos had called them. Skilled eyes. The ability to see what others missed. During her years at the trauma center, she learned to read bodies like books. The way a patient held their neck. The rhythm of their breathing. The small tells that separated psychological pain from physical injury hiding beneath. She'd saved a child once. A 7-year-old boy brought in after witnessing his uncle's murder. Everyone said it was trauma, pure psychological shutdown. But Miriam noticed how he touched his throat. How his breathing rasped slightly when he tried to cry. She'd insisted on a laryngoscopy despite the lead psychiatrist's protests. Vocal cord damage from screaming. Treatable. Fixable. The boy spoke again 3 months later. That was 5 years ago. Before her husband died. Before the debt. Before Seoul became their only option. But the skilled eyes remained. Even when exhaustion made her vision blur. Even when discrimination made her doubt her own expertise. Even when Korea treated her nursing degree like it was printed on toilet paper. At 6:47 p.m., her hospital shift ended. She had 45 minutes to get across town to the elderly care facility. No time for dinner. She ate a triangle kimbap from the convenience store on the subway, standing because sitting meant she might fall asleep and miss her stop. Mrs. Chin texted her at 8:30. Ada asking for you. I tell her you working hard for her future. Miriam stared at the message until her vision blurred. Not from exhaustion this time. She typed back, tell her I love her. Tell her I'll be home soon. Soon meant midnight if she was lucky. Soon meant another day survived in a city that needed her labor but not her presence. Soon meant one day closer to building something that wouldn't collapse the moment she stopped running. Wednesday morning arrived like every other morning in Jim Hongul's fortress. Security feeds checked. Reports received. Min drawing her nightmares in red crayon while her father sat helplessly beside her, counting the minutes until he had to pretend he was still in control of something. But this Wednesday was different. This Wednesday, Jim made a decision that would have gotten most men in his position killed. He was going outside his world. His head of security, a man named Park who'd taken 3 bullets for him in Busan, stood in the doorway looking like he'd been asked to commit suicide. Sir, with respect, this is insane. A community clinic? In Itaewon? You can't. I can, Jim said quietly. And I will. The risk is mine to take. Jim looked at Min, still drawing, still silent, still trapped in that night 7 years ago. Every private doctor, every specialist, every expert I've paid has said the same thing. Nothing. They've given me nothing. He turned back to Park. So now I try something else. Park's jaw tightened. If anyone recognizes you, then you do your job. Jim's voice was flat, final. We leave in an hour. Plain clothes. 2 cars. Tell the men to look like fathers, not enforcers. It was a last desperate measure, born from 7 years of failure and a burned letter from Switzerland. The Itaewon Community Health Clinic served immigrants, foreign workers, people who couldn't afford Samsung Medical Center. People who existed in Seoul's margins. People Jim Hongul would never normally acknowledge. But desperation didn't care about status. Desperation made ghosts visible. Across the city, Miriam Nona was already at the clinic, and she was furious. Unpaid overtime? She stood in front of Administrator Lee's desk, her voice controlled but sharp. I worked 16 hours last weekend. 16. Your records say 12. Administrator Lee didn't look up from his computer. The system logged you out at 8 p.m. Saturday. If you stayed longer, that was your choice. My choice? Miriam's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against his desk. Dr. Kim asked me to stay. 3 emergency walk-ins. A child with a fever of 40 degrees. But that was my choice. Dr. Kim isn't here to verify that. Dr. Kim is never here to verify anything. Miriam leaned forward. I have bills due Friday. My rent is late. I need those 4 hours paid. Administrator Lee finally looked at her. His expression was blank, bureaucratic, the look of a man who'd had this conversation before and would have it again. File a formal complaint. It will be reviewed in 30 days. 30 days. Miriam straightened, her jaw tight. 30 days meant eviction. 30 days meant Ada eating rice and kimchi for dinner again because meat was too expensive. 30 days meant nothing. She walked out of his office before she said something that would cost her the job entirely. The clinic waiting room was already filling up. Foreign workers with work injuries. Immigrant mothers with sick children. People who looked like her, sounded like her, survived like her. People Seoul needed but didn't want to see. She grabbed the patient charts from the reception desk, flipping through them with practiced efficiency. Her skilled eyes scanned symptoms, medical histories, intake notes. A construction worker with a persistent cough. A pregnant woman needing prenatal vitamins. A child with an ear infection. Standard Wednesday morning in Itaewon. Then she paused on the last chart. New patient. Child, 7 years old, female. Chief complaint, selective mutism, 7 years duration. Medical history, extensive. Pages of specialist consultations from hospitals Miriam couldn't afford to walk into. Seoul National. Tokyo Medical. Clinics in Switzerland, New York, London. Miriam frowned. This wasn't a typical community clinic patient. This was someone with money, resources, access to the best care on earth. So why were they here? She was still staring at the chart when the clinic door opened. Jim Hongul walked in first, dressed in plain clothes that cost more than Miriam's monthly rent, but looked deliberately unremarkable. 2 men flanked him, their eyes scanning the room with the kind of awareness that came from years of violence. And between them, holding her father's hand, was a small girl with dark eyes and silence wrapped around her like armor. Miriam looked at Min. Min looked at the floor. And somewhere in the space between them, the trajectory of 2 lives shifted. The girl touched her throat. Just once. A small gesture, barely noticeable. But Miriam noticed. Her skilled eyes always noticed. She set down the chart and walked toward them. Miriam called them into exam room 3, the smallest room at the back of the clinic. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white. Jim sat in the plastic chair against the wall while his bodyguards positioned themselves at the door, their presence filling the tiny space with threat. Min stood in the center of the room, small and silent, her hand still clutching her father's sleeve. "I'm Nurse Nona," Miriam said in careful Korean, kneeling so she was eye level with the child. "Can you sit here for me?" She gestured to the examination table. Min didn't move. Didn't even look at her. Jim spoke softly in Korean, too fast for Miriam to catch all the words, but the tone was gentle. Pleading. Min finally let go of his sleeve and climbed onto the table, her small legs dangling over the edge. Miriam stood and pulled Min's chart from the counter, reading as she prepared her instruments. The medical history was staggering. Consultations at hospitals Miriam had only heard about in nursing school. Psychiatric evaluations. Brain scans. Experimental therapies. Every report concluded the same thing: severe psychological trauma, selective mutism, no physical pathology detected, prognosis poor. But something nagged at her. She looked up from the chart, watching Min sit perfectly still on the examination table. The girl's breathing was shallow, controlled. Her shoulders were tense. And every few seconds, her hand drifted up to touch her throat. Not scratching. Not rubbing. Just touching, like she was checking if something was still there. When did she stop speaking? Miriam asked, her Korean slow but clear. Jim's voice was rough. 7 years ago. The night her mother died. And that night, Miriam scanned the intake form again. The intake notes say she witnessed violence. That she screamed. For hours. Jim's hands gripped his knees. The neighbors heard her before my men found her. She screamed until no sound came out. Miriam's pulse quickened. She looked at Min again, her skilled eyes tracking the small details everyone else had missed. The way the girl breathed, not deep breaths, but careful, shallow ones. The way her hand kept returning to her throat. The slight tension in her neck muscles, like she was protecting something. Has anyone examined her vocal cords? Miriam asked. Jim blinked. Her, what? Her vocal cords. Has anyone looked at her throat? Physically examined it. She's had brain scans. Psychological evaluations. Every specialist said it's trauma, not physical. I know what the specialist said. Miriam moved closer to Min, her voice soft. But I need to check something. She switched to English, simpler, hoping the girl might understand. Minna, can you open your mouth for me? Just for a second. Min stared at her. For a moment, nothing. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she opened her mouth. Miriam pulled out a tongue depressor and a pen light. I need you to breathe deep for me. Can you do that? Min inhaled. And there it was. So subtle most people would miss it. A slight rasp. A whisper of resistance in her airway. Miriam's heart began to race. Again, she said. Breathe in deep. Min obeyed. The rasp was there again, faint but present. Miriam stepped back, her mind working through possibilities. Screaming for hours. Prolonged vocal strain. A 7-year-old's vocal cords subjected to trauma that no one had bothered to examine because the psychological diagnosis was so obvious, so complete, so convenient. She turned to Jim. Every doctor focused on her mind. They saw the trauma, the silence, and they stopped looking. What are you saying? I'm saying your daughter's silence might not be purely psychological. Miriam pulled out her stethoscope. I'm saying she might have a physical injury that's been hiding under the trauma diagnosis for 7 years. Jim stood up slowly. That's impossible. We saw the best. The best psychiatrists. The best neurologists. Miriam met his eyes. But did you see an ENT specialist? Did anyone examine her throat after that night? Did anyone consider that screaming for hours might have damaged her vocal cords? The room went silent. Even the bodyguards seemed to hold their breath. Jim's voice was barely a whisper. They said it was psychological. All of them. They said. They were looking at her brain, Miriam interrupted. I'm looking at her body. She turned back to Min, whose dark eyes were fixed on her now, something flickering in them that hadn't been there before. Recognition, maybe. Or hope. The most dangerous thing in the world. I need better equipment than this clinic has, Miriam said. I need to see her vocal cords. Really see them. The memory hit Miriam like a fist to the chest, sudden and complete, pulling her back 5 years to a trauma center in Lagos where the generators ran on prayers and the blood never stopped coming. The girl's name had been Chioma. 6 years old. Brought in by her grandmother 3 weeks after armed robbers invaded their compound in Seoul. The grandmother's hands shook as she filled out the intake form, her voice breaking as she explained what the child had witnessed. Her father shot in the living room. Her mother dragged into the bedroom. Chioma hiding under the kitchen table, screaming until the neighbors came running hours later. By the time they brought her to the hospital, Chioma hadn't spoken a single word. Dr. Okonkwo, the lead psychiatrist, had been certain. Acute traumatic mutism, he declared after his evaluation, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in practice. The child's mind has shut down the capacity for speech as a defense mechanism. It's textbook PTSD. She needs therapy, time, and patience, not medical intervention. But Miriam had been assigned to Chioma's care, checking vitals 3 times a day, bringing her meals she wouldn't eat, sitting with her during the long afternoons when the grandmother had to work. And Miriam noticed things. The way Chioma touched her throat. The way she opened her mouth sometimes, her lips forming words, her tongue moving, but no sound coming out. The way she'd try to cry and only manage a whisper. The way her breathing sounded just slightly wrong, like air moving through a damaged pipe. I think we should examine her throat, Miriam had told Dr. Okonkwo during rounds. Something physical might be. Nurse Nona, he'd interrupted, his tone patient but dismissive. I appreciate your dedication, but you're seeing symptoms that aren't there. The child's mutism is psychological. Adding unnecessary medical procedures will only traumatize her further. Miriam had nodded, smiled, backed down like a good nurse should. Then she'd waited until her shift ended and gone to find Dr. Adeyemi, the ENT specialist who owed her a favor after she'd covered his weekend shifts for a month straight. Just look, she'd pleaded. 10 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll never bother you again. Dr. Adeyemi had sighed, but he'd come. He'd brought his portable laryngoscope to Chioma's room after visiting hours, when the ward was quiet and Dr. Okonkwo had gone home. The grandmother had held Chioma's hand while Dr. Adeyemi gently inserted the scope. What he saw made him freeze. Jesus, he'd whispered. Miriam, look at this. She leaned in, watching the monitor. Chioma's vocal cords were damaged, scarred tissue visible even to Miriam's untrained eye. The left cord barely moved when the girl tried to make sound. The trauma wasn't psychological. It was physical. Hidden beneath the obvious psychological wounds, masked by the textbook diagnosis, ignored because everyone had stopped looking once they found the trauma. She screamed herself voiceless, Dr. Adeyemi had said quietly. Prolonged vocal strain, probably hours of screaming. The cords are damaged, possibly nodules or hemorrhaging that healed incorrectly. This is treatable, Miriam. This is fixable. The surgery had been simple. 30 minutes to remove the nodules, repair the damage, give Chioma back what the trauma had stolen. The recovery took weeks. Speech therapy, patience, encouragement. But 3 months after that night, Chioma had spoken her first word in front of her grandmother. Mama. The old woman had collapsed to her knees, weeping. Dr. Okonkwo had been furious that Miriam had gone behind his back, then grudgingly impressed when the results proved her right. But what stayed with Miriam wasn't the vindication or the praise. It was the promise she'd made to herself that night, standing in the hospital parking lot as the Lagos traffic roared past and the generator rumbled behind her. Never again would she ignore the body when treating the mind. Never again would she let a diagnosis, no matter how obvious, stop her from looking deeper. Never again would she let authority convince her to unsee what her skilled eyes had already seen. She'd carried that promise through her husband's death, through the debt that chased them from Lagos, through every humiliation Seoul had thrown at her. It was the one thing she hadn't compromised, hadn't traded away, hadn't let this city take from her. And now, standing in exam room 3 of a community clinic in Itaewon, watching a 7-year-old girl who hadn't spoken in 7 years touch her throat the same way Chioma had, Miriam felt that promise settle over her shoulders like armor. She looked at Jim Hongul, this dangerous man with his bodyguards and his desperation and his millions of wasted dollars, and she said the words that would change everything. I've seen this before. In Lagos. A child who stopped speaking after trauma. Everyone said it was psychological. They were wrong. She paused, making sure he understood. Your daughter might not be broken in the way they think she is. She might just need someone to look past the obvious and see what's really there. Jim stared at her. For the first time since entering the clinic, something flickered across his face. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. Something that looked like the edge of possibility. "What do you need?" he asked. Miriam looked at Min, still sitting on the examination table, still silent, still touching her throat like it held secrets no one had bothered to discover. "Better equipment," Miriam said. "And your trust." Miriam moved closer to Min, her penlight ready. "I need to see deeper into your throat, sweetheart. Can you say, 'Offer me'? Just try." Min's eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, nothing. Then the girl's mouth opened wider. Her lips formed the shape. Her tongue positioned itself. Her throat worked, muscles contracting, attempting to push sound through damaged pathways. Nothing came out. But Miriam saw it. The desperation in Min's eyes. The way her small hands gripped the edge of the examination table until her knuckles went white. The way her whole body tensed with effort, trying so hard to make sound happen, to break through 7 years of silence and give her father what he'd been begging for. Min's lips formed another shape. Silent. Her throat worked again. Nothing. Her eyes filled with tears, frustration, and fear mixing into something that looked like drowning. "It's okay," Miriam whispered, her hand on Min's shoulder. "It's okay, Minna. I see you trying. I see you." But she needed more than a penlight and a tongue depressor. She needed a flexible laryngoscope. She needed proper imaging equipment. She needed tools this clinic didn't have because community clinics serving immigrants didn't get the budgets that let them save lives properly. Miriam turned toward the supply cabinet, her mind racing through options. There was a hospital 10 minutes away. Samsung Medical Center, where she worked reception and wasn't allowed to touch actual medical equipment, but knew where everything was stored. If she could get Min there. If she could convince someone to let her use. Hold up. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Hit like and comment your country or city and what you're enjoying most about the story so far. I'm reading every single one. Park stepped in front of her. The bodyguard moved fast, silent, his body blocking the doorway like a wall of muscle and threat. His hand rested near his jacket, where Miriam's trained eyes recognized the outline of a weapon. "Where are you going?" His Korean was clipped, suspicious. "I need equipment," Miriam said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "This clinic doesn't have what I need to properly examine her." Park didn't move. Behind him, the second bodyguard shifted position, cutting off the other angle. They'd been trained for this, protecting their employer from threats. And right now, to them, Miriam was a threat. "You're not leaving with the girl," Park said. "I'm not trying to. You're not leaving at all until Mr. Jim says you can." Miriam felt the moment crystallize. She could back down. Apologize. Tell them she was mistaken. She could let Min return to her father's fortress, where silence would continue to suffocate them both. She could keep her head down, finish her shift, go home to Ada and forget about the desperate eyes of a 7-year-old girl who was trying so hard to speak and couldn't. She could stay safe. Or she could fight. "Move," Miriam said quietly. Park's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said move." Miriam stepped forward, her voice gaining strength. "That child has vocal cord damage. She needs a proper examination, and she needs it now. Every day that passes makes treatment harder. Every day her voice gets further away." The specialist said. "The specialists were wrong." Miriam's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "I've seen this before. I've treated this before. And I will not stand here and let your paranoia kill her chance at speaking again because you think I'm some kind of threat." Behind her, Jim stood up slowly. "Let her pass," he said. Park didn't move. "Sir, we don't know her. She could be." "I said let her pass." The command in Jim's voice was absolute. Park hesitated one more second, then stepped aside. Miriam looked at Jim. "Samsung Medical Center. 10 minutes from here." I work there. I know where the equipment is. Then we go, Jim said simply. He moved to Min, lifting her gently from the examination table. Now. Miriam grabbed her jacket and Min's chart. Her hands were shaking. She'd just challenged armed men who killed for a living. She'd just chosen a stranger's daughter over her own safety. She'd just remembered exactly why she became a nurse. The ride to Samsung Medical Center took 8 minutes. Jim's car moved through Seoul traffic like water parting, his driver knowing exactly which lanes to take, which lights to run, which rules didn't apply to men like his employer. Miriam sat in the back seat with Min, her mind racing through the procedure she'd need to perform, the equipment she'd need to access, the lies she'd have to tell to get into areas she wasn't authorized to enter. But when they pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, Jim didn't move. We can't go in, he said quietly. Miriam stared at him. What? We can't go in there. Jim's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the entrance where people moved in and out, where security cameras tracked every face, where records were kept and questions were asked. Your daughter needs. I know what my daughter needs. Jim turned to face her, and for the first time, Miriam saw something beyond the desperation. She saw fear. Real, raw fear. But the moment I walk through those doors, people will know. They'll ask questions. They'll look at records. They'll wonder why Jim Hongul is at a hospital with his daughter. Miriam's medical training kicked in before her self-preservation could stop her. She leaned forward, her voice rapid, mixing Korean and English as her frustration mounted. Your daughter has vocal cord damage, possible nodules or scarring from prolonged trauma to the laryngeal structure. She needs flexible laryngoscopy, maybe video stroboscopy to assess vocal fold movement and mucosal wave patterns. Without proper imaging, I can't determine if she needs surgical intervention or if vocal therapy alone will work. But she needs treatment. Now. Not tomorrow. Not next week. The longer we wait, the more the scar tissue sets, the harder rehabilitation becomes. Jim stared at her like she was speaking a language he couldn't parse. I need to see inside her throat, Miriam said, forcing herself to slow down. Really see it. With equipment this hospital has. Equipment I can access. You work at reception, Jim said flatly. How will you access? I'll find a way. Miriam met his eyes. But I can't do it if you won't let me try. Jim's instinct was visible on his face. The shift in his posture. The hardening of his expression. This was a man used to control, used to making threats that ended conversations. His hand moved slightly, and Park leaned forward from the front seat, reading the signal. You don't understand who you're talking to, Jim said, his voice dropping into something cold and flat. You don't understand what I can. I understand perfectly. Miriam cut him off, her voice sharp. You're a man with power. With money. With people who kill for you. I've seen the way your men move. I've seen the way you look at everyone like they're either useful or disposable. I understand exactly who you are. Jim's eyes narrowed dangerously. But right now, none of that matters. Miriam leaned closer, her voice dropping, but losing none of its intensity. Because right now, your daughter is sitting in this car with damaged vocal cords that might be treatable, and you're too afraid of being seen to let me help her. Afraid? The word came out like a threat. Yes, afraid. Miriam didn't flinch. Afraid of what people will think. Afraid of what questions they'll ask. Afraid of losing control of a situation you can't threaten or buy your way through. She paused, her eyes never leaving his. I'm a single mother working 3 jobs in a country that treats me like I'm invisible. I've got nothing. No power. No money. No protection. But I'm willing to risk what little I have to help your daughter. So you tell me, who's really afraid here? The car went silent. Park's hand moved toward his jacket. The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Min sat perfectly still between them, her small body a reminder of what was at stake. Jim stared at Miriam. at this foreign woman who'd just called him a coward to his face, who had no idea how many people he'd made disappear for less, who should be terrified but instead looked at him with absolute certainty, the kind of certainty that came from being a mother and a healer and someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by threats. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "Someone who can help your daughter speak again," Miriam said. "If you let me." They went back to the clinic. Not because it was the best option, but because it was the only option that didn't expose Jim to questions he couldn't afford to answer. Miriam made 3 phone calls on the way, her Korean rapid and desperate, calling in every favor she'd ever earned. By the time they arrived, Dr. Kim was waiting with equipment he'd borrowed from his private practice across town. A flexible laryngoscope. A portable monitor. Not ideal, but enough. Exam room 3 felt even smaller, with all of them inside. Dr. Kim set up the equipment while Miriam prepped, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Jim stood near the door until Miriam turned to him. "You need to wait outside," she said. "No." She needs to feel safe. Calm. "Having you in here while I do this will make her tense." Jim's jaw tightened. "She's my daughter. And she needs you to trust me." Miriam softened her voice. "There's a window. You can watch. But you can't be in here." For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Thought he'd pull rank, make threats, end this before it began. But then he looked at Min, sitting on the examination table with her hands folded in her lap, and something in him surrendered. He stepped outside. Positioned himself at the observation window where he could see everything. Park and the other bodyguard flanked him like statues. Miriam knelt in front of Min, meeting her eyes. "I know you're scared," she said softly in English, hoping the girl understood more than she could speak. "I know this is frightening. But I need you to trust me, okay? I'm going to look at your throat. It might feel strange, but it won't hurt. I promise." Min's eyes darted to the window where her father stood watching. "He's right there," Miriam said. "He can see you. You're safe." She began the procedure slowly, talking through every step. The laryngoscope was thin, flexible, designed to navigate the pathways of the throat without causing trauma. Dr. Kim monitored the screen while Miriam worked, her years of training guiding her hands even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The image appeared on the monitor. Min's vocal cords magnified, visible in stark detail. And there it was. Exactly what Miriam had suspected. Scar tissue on the left vocal fold. Nodules on the right. The cords barely moving when Min tried to produce sound, damaged from that night 7 years ago when she'd screamed until her voice broke and no one had thought to check if the breaking was physical. "Oh, Minna," Miriam whispered. "I see it. I see what's been hurting you." She withdrew the scope carefully, then sat back on her heels. Through the window, Jim pressed his hand against the glass, his face tight with something that looked like hope and terror mixed together. "Your throat is injured," Miriam said to Min, her voice gentle. "But injuries can heal. Do you understand? You're not broken. You're hurt. And hurt things can get better." Min stared at her. Silent. Always silent. "I want you to try something for me," Miriam continued. "Just try. Don't worry if nothing comes out. Don't worry if it hurts. Just try to make a sound. Any sound. Can you do that?" Min's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. "I know you're scared. I know you've tried before and nothing happened. But I'm here now. And I'm telling you, your voice is still there. It's just hiding, waiting for you to be ready." Miriam reached out and gently placed her hand over Min's, where it rested against her throat. "Feel that? That's your voice box. It's been waiting 7 years for you. It's ready when you are." Min's lips trembled. Her throat worked. "Nothing. It's okay," Miriam whispered. "Try again." Min's mouth opened. Her breath caught. And then, so quiet Miriam almost missed it, a sound emerged. Barely a whisper. Barely anything at all. But it was there. Through the window, Jim's hand slammed against the glass. Again, Miriam said, her voice shaking now. Try again, Minna. The second sound was stronger. A small vocalization, rasping and broken, but unmistakably real. Min's eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her throat, feeling the vibration, feeling proof that she could still make sound, that 7 years of silence hadn't stolen everything. The third sound was a sob. Raw and broken and absolutely human. The sob turned into another sound. Then another. Min's hand stayed pressed against her throat, feeling each vibration like it was a miracle, like she was discovering a part of herself she'd forgotten existed. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept trying, kept pushing sound through damaged pathways that were finally responding. Miriam's own eyes blurred. That's it, sweetheart. That's it. Min's lips formed a shape. Her throat worked. And then, rasping and broken but unmistakably clear, a word emerged. AP. Pa. Dad. Through the observation window, Jim Hongul collapsed. Not gracefully. Not with control. His legs simply gave out, and he dropped to his knees, his forehead pressing against the glass as his shoulders shook with 7 years of grief he'd never allowed himself to feel. Park stepped forward instinctively, but Jim waved him away, his hand trembling. Inside the exam room, Min slid off the table and ran to the window, her small palms pressing against the glass where her father's head rested. Appa, she said again, stronger this time. Appa, Appa. Miriam opened the door. Min flew through it and into her father's arms, and Jim held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth, his face buried in her hair, his body racked with sobs that he'd been holding back since the night his wife died and his daughter's voice disappeared. I'm sorry, he kept saying in Korean over and over. I'm sorry, Minna. I'm so sorry. Min's voice was hoarse, damaged, barely functional. But she used it anyway, forming words she'd been holding inside for 7 years. Not your fault, Appa. Not your fault. Miriam stood in the doorway, watching this dangerous man break apart in the hallway of a community clinic, watched him become human in a way that power and money could never make him. She thought of Ada, waiting at home with Mrs. Chen. Thought of her own grief, her own survival, her own journey to this moment. Dr. Kim touched her shoulder gently. You did good, Nurse Nona. After several minutes, Jim stood, still holding Min, his face wet and raw. He looked at Miriam with eyes that had seen too much violence and not enough mercy. Anything, he said, his voice rough. Name it. Money, protection, a job, citizenship papers for you and your daughter. Anything you want. It's yours. Miriam had been poor long enough to know what anything meant from a man like Jim Hongul. It meant security. It meant Ada could go to good schools. It meant no more triple shifts, no more unpaid overtime, no more fighting administrators who treated her like she was disposable. It meant everything she'd been struggling for. I don't want your money, she said quietly. Jim stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't know existed. Your daughter needs proper therapy, Miriam continued. Vocal rehabilitation with a specialist. Maybe surgery to remove the nodules, maybe not. She'll need months of work to strengthen those damaged cords. And she'll need psychological support too, because the trauma and the physical injury are tangled together. I'll hire the best. No. Miriam shook her head. You'll hire good therapists. People who care. Not just people who cost the most. And, she paused, knowing she was about to ask for something dangerous. I want to be part of her treatment. I want to help her heal. Why? Jim's question wasn't suspicious. It was genuine, confused. Why would you want to stay involved? Miriam looked at Min, still clinging to her father, her voice hoarse but present. Because I became a nurse to help people heal. And this city has tried very hard to make me forget that. Your daughter reminded me. Something passed between them. An understanding between two parents who'd both lost partners, both raised daughters alone, both learned that love required a kind of courage that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with vulnerability. "Okay," Jim said. "But I pay you for your time. And I make sure no one at that hospital treats you like you're invisible ever again." Miriam opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Pride was expensive. Ada needed to eat. "Okay, hold up. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Hit like and comment your country or city and what you're enjoying most about the story so far. I'm reading every single one." 3 months later, Min stood in the music room of the Gangnam penthouse, a room that had been silent for 7 years, filled now with the sound of a child's voice learning to be strong again. She was singing a lullaby her mother had sung to her when she was a baby, before everything shattered. Her voice was still rough, still healing, but it carried the melody beautifully. Jim sat in the corner, listening. And for the first time since June died, he let himself cry without hiding it, let himself grieve without shame, let himself be broken in front of his daughter, who was finally whole enough to help him heal too. Miriam stood in the doorway, watching. She'd turned down most of Jim's offers, but she'd accepted enough. Ada was in a good school now. The bills were paid. And 3 times a week, Miriam came to this fortress to work with Min on vocal exercises, therapy techniques, and the slow rebuilding of a voice that had been lost. She'd found her purpose in Seoul. Not despite being foreign, but because of it. Because she'd looked where others wouldn't. Because she'd seen what others missed. Because she'd had the courage to fight for a child who wasn't hers. Min finished the lullaby, her voice cracking on the final note, but holding steady. She turned to her father and smiled. "Did Yama sing it like that?" she asked, her Korean still halting, but growing stronger every day. Jim wiped his eyes and smiled back. "Exactly like that, Minna. Exactly like that." Outside the bulletproof windows, Seoul stretched out in all directions. A city that had tried to break them both. A city that had, instead, given them the collision they needed to finally start healing.